Life is tough. Life is uncertain. Times are hectic. We need to be resilient to be able to survive this and get through and be better. So I think it's actually essential that we focus on joy.
The joy when you presented that medal or the trophy is very short-lived, right? It's the joy of the journey to get there. That's where the real joy comes from, you know?
What are the underlying things of that? For me, it's about purpose, it's about meaning, and it's about connection. Those three things, you know? Like a really joyful thing for me is about being seen, you know? Like really, like someone listening to me really getting me and who I am.
Welcome to Joy Squared, Live with Joy. This is the podcast where we get to explore the power of joy, purpose, passion, and fun, and how joy, when practiced intentionally, transforms how we live, work, and lead. I'm your host, Greg DeCoker, and I believe that when you live with joy, everything gets better, and I mean everything. And this isn't just about feeling good. It's about unlocking joy as a resource, one that fuels better leadership, meaningful work, and thriving lives. Each week, we share the stories, the insights, and the sparks that ignite more joy, because joy is contagious, it's powerful, and it belongs to all of us. So lean in, stay curious, and let's create more joy together. This is Joy Squared, brought to you by Essentia Group. Welcome back to the Joy Squared Live with Joy podcast, where we explore the hidden power of joy in leadership, work, and life. I'm your host, Greg DeCoker, and today's episode is especially meaningful because it marks another chapter in something I'm really excited about. As many of you know, Joy Squared is supported by many incredible founding sponsors, and our founding title sponsor, Ray Cervellis, CEO of Essentia Group, is not just backing this podcast, he's actively co-creating it with me. So each month, Ray joins me as co-host and brings a guest who is shaping leadership, culture, strategy, and business in meaningful ways. And today's guest is someone whose work beautifully intersects with what we talk about here: leading, working, and living with more purpose, passion, humanity, and joy. Ray, welcome. I'm grateful to be building this with you. And I'm now going to hand it over to you to introduce today's special guest and get us started.
Thank you, Greg. I'm certainly very excited to have Tracey here with us, and it's an honor to introduce her to you and to our listeners as my first guest on the podcast. So welcome, Tracey. Tracey has completed her BA honors degree in communications at what we now call the University of Johannesburg. She then went on to study an MBA degree at the Henley Business School in the UK. And she's the founder of an organization called Thinkspiration. It's a strategy and culture activation consultancy. What she does is she helps companies to distill a complexity into clarity, enabling employees all the way from the boardroom right to the frontline worker to get onto the same page and get empowered through that story. She started her career in advertising and has worked primarily in the mining and resource industries for the past 25 years. Tracey speaks and writes extensively on strategy, on culture, and leadership issues facing business today. Her first book, entitled The Leadership Riptide and How to Escape It, was published in 2016 and was selected by the South African Board of People Practices in 2017 as one of their top 5 leadership books. She also authored her second book called Leading for Engagement, 7 Sins and 7 Secrets, which was released in 2022. And this book outlines some real practical tools and skills every leader needs to create a high-performance culture. I've read both her books, and if you're listening, I encourage you to get your hands on them. They are really useful tools. I can tell you from first-hand experience, Tracey is passionate about developing practical solutions for organizations, and is an expert in crystallizing corporate vision and strategy into a clear story of the organization's ambitions and values. And she has been instrumental in empowering leaders to drive strategy into the hearts of the people of the organization. So, Tracey, it's an absolute honor to have you here with us. I'm super excited to hear what you're going to share with us. So, welcome, Tracey.
Thanks so much, Ray. Thanks to both of you for having me. It's an absolute, can I say joy, but it's a blessing and a privilege to be here. So really excited about this. Thank you.
Thank you, Tracy. So let us get the conversation going, and tell us about. I mean, I've seen some of the work you're doing, but tell us about some of the work that you do, and what does joy really mean for you at this stage of your life?
So I guess it's really about an awareness, in the work that we do. I guess for me, it's if I think about it and really distill it, it's about connecting. So the work that we do, that whole sort of process of distilling corporate strategy, a whole lot of complexity to something that is simple, that is a story that people can get. There's an incredible sense of joy and satisfaction when you see that process happening. So there's a couple of places in that process that really give me joy. One is, there's creativity involved. So the joy of making connections, of coming up with ideas, of translating kind of very abstract things into analogies, into stories, into practical ways that people can understand them. So that's pretty joyful. And then when you see that sort of land with people, you sort of see the people in the company that, I mean, recently we did a job with in the sugar industry, actually. So workers in a sugar mill, and you start off the sort of process with the map, and they're kind of looking at you like, what's happening now? And then you go through the process and you actually see them come alive. You see that like spark and that like sparkle in their eyes, and they get so passionate. So it's those kind of moments that, that really, like, really sustain me, and really, I guess it's a little bit of a thrill. I mean, obviously, they're parts like all of us in all our jobs. There's the kind of, mundane, not so joyful bits. Seeing the result in people, and seeing that, that meaning and that connection made is really quite a fantastic experience.
Absolutely, Tracy. I've experienced some of that with Tracy, and what she talks about is that almost like the headlights coming on in people's minds about what the leadership's doing and what this all means in their lives. So it really is transformational.
I was just going to say, I love that whole process, the creative process. I'm a huge fan of that after, kind of owning a small ad agency and branding studio for
Yeah.
years. And after conducting a lot of kind of brand orientation sessions and
Hmm.
brand ambassador sessions and really trying to communicate what the company stands for and what it's about in different ways, we used examples and we used case studies and we tried to illustrate it, but it was like, it's a PowerPoint and we didn't do it the way that you're doing. And it was still effective. I'm just wondering, using your approach, I mean, probably would have saved time and made it easier, because I know back in the day, they used to say a picture is worth 1,000 words.
Yeah.
Now I've heard them say a picture is worth 10,000 words, because 'cause we're so busy and there's so much going on and there's so much clutter and
That's
everything's trying to
Yeah,
kinda get in here, and it's tough. So I it
exactly.
and it sounds like we also talk about, you know, kinda living, working, and leading with joy intentionally, not just having joy as a result or a
Mhm.
reward,
Yeah.
and it sounds like you've built it into the process, which is really fascinating. I'd love to hear a little bit more about that, the joy kinda throughout the process, not just the final, picture illustration.
Yeah, I think it's almost like it's not like we created the process to sort of be joyful, really. It's we which I think it's a lovely unintended consequence of it. But it's really about saying, how can you, I think as human beings, if things are
Mm.
simple, we get, there's joy in that. We get it, we relate to it, we understand it. And I think that just making things simple, making them concrete, when we use an analogy, everyone can relate. There's that like way of sort of bringing out people's humanity, no matter where you are in an organization. You don't have to sort of have done your MBA at Harvard or be the CEO or whatever. You can relate to the stuff. So I think the story, the analogy, whatever it is, it's always different that we use, helps a lot. And I think as you say, the picture is worth 1,000 words. So much so. Ray and I, don't get us started. We'll go off onto the 10 years ago picture that we can both now see in our heads. We haven't looked at it for years, but it sticks, a picture sticks. And then the other sort of component that I think is incredibly joyful about our process is it's about people actually having conversations and being able to express themselves. And I think in organizations generally, we don't really allow for that a lot. It's kind of a little bit like, the boss speaks, everyone else kind of nods and whatever. So that, like, actually saying to people, here's your permission to contribute to this. We want to know what you have to say. What do you think? What are you actually seeing there? And people sort of having that permission to express themselves, I think, adds to that sort of process. I mean, when we have our sessions, there's laughter, there's, a hilarity, it's loud, it really is a lovely environment. And I mean, a lot of our clients, they're like general corporate setting. I mean, as Ray would well know, is pretty formal, pretty like, structured, like don't speak unless you speak. It's kind of, a bit sort of stiff in a way. And I mean, this is the opposite of that. So I think it gives people, it's sort of
Sure.
liberating in that sense.
Sure. And I think, Tracy, a big part of the way you do that is through the whole storytelling technique. And I remember we actually went on a storytelling course to learn how to tell stories as leaders. And I think that whole storytelling and bringing the story of the strategy and the vision and the values to life is, I think, what energizes
Yeah.
people and brings joy to them, because they see how they fit into the big puzzle, you know? So even though maybe it was unintentional, but it's certainly it's happening, right? The joy is being that flame, that spark of joy is being lit through the process that you follow.
Yeah.
I think we sort of get how you almost unintentionally are creating this joy in the work that you do with leadership teams and within the people of the organizations. Tell us a bit, how do you do some of the things in your personal life? Because you also have a happy, healthy home life, and whenever I talk to you and Bernard, you're talking about your son and the wonderful things he's doing, and tell us, how do you blend all this wonderful work you're doing, creating joy in organizations, into your personal life?
Well, I have to confess, Ray, I feel very guilty that I'm not deliberate at all in that sense, right? So I think a little bit of it is, um, there, I guess if you're passionate about what you do, there's no real end to work and home life. So Bernard and I, my husband, we work together. So we are, we often like talking about different facets of our work. And what we've realized is with Zach, our 20-year-old son, is he's sort of been, in the back of the car for like 20 years, listening to us talk about stuff. And I guess what happens, which I think is an incredible and again, maybe unintended consequence, is you create this shared world of like, because you always in each other's, you understand where each other are coming from. So there's a lot of overlap. And
Hmm.
I guess in that process, I think one of like a really joyful thing for me is about being seen, like really like someone listening to me, really getting me and who I am. And I think in the family setup, sometimes if the husband works in his world and the wife is in her world and the kids are in their world, you don't necessarily have that opportunity to overlap, to see each other as humans, not just as like mom dad role. I mean, where we are now is we have lovely conversations in our family, which is very fulfilling, about all the things. One minute we're talking about, inspiration. We're talking about Bernard and Zach are very involved in Ankoli cattle business, right? So we're talking about Bernard's cows, as I call them. We're talking about Zach's future options, where he's going to go, what he's thinking about, how he's thinking about his life. So I guess, that really is joyful. And I think, again, it comes back to, what are the underlying things of that? For me, it's about purpose, it's about meaning, and it's about connection. Those three things, For me, joy is like a deeper, more like sort of just a deeper thing. I said to someone a couple of weeks ago, I was really feeling a bit under pressure, and I was like, I'm deeply joyful, but I'm hiding it well, right? So like the stress and whatever that you deal with, but underneath it, there's a reason, there's a purpose to it. You're doing something meaningful in the world. You're connecting,
Correct.
Either things together or with people or making some difference in people's lives. And that really is deeply satisfying and joyful.
One thing, if I can add in, what I heard was you kind of said you didn't really set out to build in joy in your process. And it sounds like that's not kind of what you're doing personally either, but it sounds like that's who you are. And it comes down to how you're being.
Mm,
And I think you don't need to
mm,
build it in because that's who you are. Right. And which I think is really special. And it
Oh, thank you. Thank you. That is so
yeah.
lovely. Thank
Your
you.
you know, your
That
energy
is,
is just it is infectious. Joy is infectious too, right? I mean, that's a
yeah.
contagious. Maybe it's a better word. I think, Ray, we were talking about that. Contagious is slightly better than infectious. So,
sure.
and one thing that you mentioned with your family is either I know, maybe that's a separate podcast episode. You mentioned kind of your son just being in the back seat and kind of hearing the conversations and being part of the
Yeah.
conversations, your family
Yeah.
conversations. And it reminded me of I put a lot of pressure on myself to kind of help our kids create with life lessons and what more can I teach him and how can I kind of help him and what
Yes.
ideas can I give him? How can I share my learnings and mistakes and all that stuff? And while I still put pressure on myself to do that, I kind of took a little bit of pressure out because I realized the most important thing is how I'm being around them, right? How I'm
Yes.
being with their mom,
Um,
how I'm being with
Yeah.
strangers, how I'm being with their teachers, how I'm being
Mm-hmm.
with their
Mm.
friends, of course, how I'm being with them. So, I think that really, because everything that we do comes out of how we're being. If we're being loving and we're being joyful, our actions are going to be loving and joyful. If we're being angry, our actions are going to be angry, right? So I think that's what I kind of heard in the underlying tone of what you shared, which I wanted to bring out, which I thought was really special.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's so true. And it's really about, I think also, I mean, there's good and, good things that happen, and there's also not so good things that happen. So I think just being also having that like space to be like authentic, to say I've had a really tough day. And I mean, from Zach, from being little, we've always been like that, like I've said. I mean, one of the reasons I actually did that was because, they get into the car, you fetch them from school. I don't know what, like they sort of 10, 11, and it's like, how was your day, Zach? And he would be like, fine. And, how was school? Good. And I was like, oh, this is like pulling teeth. So then I decided, well, I will share with him what my day was like. So I would just tell him,
Absolutely.
I had this client, DRA, they were so fantastic. I had this wonderful, and or whatever, or difficult stuff as well. And I really, so by doing that, then all of a sudden he goes, well, actually, I also had a difficult situation at school, or so I
Yeah.
think that like opening that line, of just sort of sharing, like, you know,
Mm,
on that level helps a lot, and created the kind of connection, that we still have now.
mm.
Love it.
And Tracy, I love the way Greg sort of clarified that, the way you approach business and life is it's not intentional. It's because it's who you are, right? So other people have got to work a little bit harder at it, almost fake it until you make it kind of thing. But you don't need to be that because it's who you are. It's authentic. So that's amazing. So can you share with us a moment? You've shared with us a few things already, but a moment either in business and or in personal life where you really felt complete joy in something that's happened.
Actually, I'd love to share that. Before I get there, though, I would love to just talk about from sort of when I was much younger. I played tennis. I actually dreamed about winning Wimbledon, right? When I was 10. Never did. But I did play competitive tennis, and I did eventually get a scholarship to the States. So it was pretty serious. But one thing that I remember, even from those times, was what I used to tell myself if I wanted to win was enjoy the challenge, enjoy the game. Because
Mm,
I realized if you enjoy it, you actually are successful. And I've often
Sure.
like I'm really like curious about this, and it's there in terms of like the link between like enjoying it and performing well. I think there's a definite
mm,
link, in that sense. So I think, I'm much more aware of that. I look out for those kinds of things. And I mean, you asked me, what a moment of like joy. I think there's lots of micro moments or micro doses, I guess, that I experience, um seeing, we had a presentation a couple of weeks ago, and a client was really, he said, I'm absolutely blown away about what you've done and how you've captured. And it's that like sense that you've listened, you've reflected back to the client, what almost like in a very kind of empathetic way, like, this is your world, this is how we see it, this is how we can bring it together, and this is where it could go. So I those like moments of like, wild joy. I mean, I think they, for me, they're more kind of
Mhm.
micro moments of, seeing how people respond and react and whatever. And then, just, I mean, that like winning the title or the match or the sporting event or whatever. It's really interesting because when you are doing that, or the joy is not there. It's actually
Okay.
what you've done on the way to get there,
Exactly.
yeah.
So
Exactly.
I'm like, sometimes I don't feel so joyful at the end. I feel more joyful during. So sorry,
Correct.
I don't know if that at all answers your question, but
Absolutely
it's
does.
it's like a process for me. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It resonates entirely, Tracy, because the joy
Mhm.
when you presented that medal or the trophy is very short lived, right? It's the joy of the journey to get there.
Mhm.
That's where the
Yeah.
real joy comes from, you know?
It really, really is. So, I mean, I know that's like almost, you almost have to, it's almost like a little bit of a disappointment because you're like, it's like anticlimax, like, oh, you know, but like on the way, it's those little
Eh,
moments of on the way there, you see the little micro things. And I think because I'm aware of, maybe I don't know if I've been deliberate about this, because I am aware of the link between joy and performing well. I look out for it. So
uh-huh.
Good.
what you look for, you find more of, right? So I'm very tuned in to that, to people responding well, to, just seeing it. So I guess when you look for it, you do see more of it, which is good, you know?
For sure.
So, yeah.
I love that. And Tracy, I love the fact that it like you felt that joy. Like it wasn't you felt that joy. You saw that joy. You saw the end so many times because you visualized it that when you actually achieved it, you had already experienced it so many times. It wasn't really new. So it was just
That's
kind of like
yes.
matter of fact, right? It kind of reminds me of this Buddhist expression, we journey to the end, but in the end, it's the journey, which is exactly what
Correct.
we're
Oh, I
talking
love
about.
that. I love
Yeah.
that. Absolutely
So
love it.
very cool. So
Yeah.
I love that story. You know what made me think about was I'd love to ask you because the one thing that when I read about, what you did and how you've been chasing, you were chasing Wimbledon since you were 10 and then your tennis career ended prematurely due to an injury. And I
Yeah.
thought, like, that could potentially be a forced identity shift if who you are,
Mm.
leading up to that is all about that. Like, how did you kind of protect your spirit and your joy, like, during that whole transition? I'd love to hear a little bit about that because that's something that could really block it, right? That could be a major block in your joy. So I'd
Yes.
love to hear about that.
I think if you feel like you have a deeper purpose in life, and I mean, there's a sort of journey that you're on, a faith journey. So what happened with my injury was, I was overseas, I got injured, I had a fusion, I went back, I tried again, I got injured. So it's kind of like, as my husband says, God had to speak really loud to you, right? So it's like,
Almost shouting.
and then shouting, right? So, and and then I guess it is just having faith in the fact that what your purpose is, what your purpose on earth is, and finding what it is that's next. I mean, make no mistake, it was because, I mean, look, I was 19, 20 at that stage. Your identity is very formed on, like, I'm the tennis player and that's who I am. And, so it's like, well, if you're not that, what now? What do you do? I mean, the other thing that I always sort of enjoyed and nurtured and loved was writing. So, and English and literature and whatever. So I guess that sort of was like an avenue. Okay, well, let's explore that now. And then hence led me to study, led me into advertising. So I sort of found that as a like alternative path, in a very blessed way and quite quickly. So I think, but it was, I mean, it's still, to this day, I meet people, that I was at school with, and they're like, are you still playing tennis? I'm like, no, not doing that. But having said that, I think you also, there's a great quote. I think it's Kierkegaard: life must be lived forwards, but can only be understood when you looking backwards, right? So if I look back and I see how much of what I experienced in my tennis journey I have used and applied to what I do now, it's unbelievable. So, visualizing, just the discipline you require to train, just there's so many aspects of, I mean, tennis and leadership and how you have to manage yourself on the court, the mental game, there's a ton of stuff. In fact, I'm even potentially thinking about another book along those lines, but I didn't say that, right? So,
You did say it out loud. You heard it here first.
And
no,
re-recording
I
it,
didn't say that
Tracey,
out.
so we got
But I
you.
think there's, you look back, can you think, wow, that was in my life for a purpose, not because I needed to hit a great backhand or a great forehand, but for so much other stuff, that I still use now in leadership stuff, in the work that I do. So I think having an appreciation for, that your life is, there is a purpose to your life, and it's a God-given purpose. And, that is the real foundational thing, I think is definitely what has anchored me.
Awesome. I love
that.
Yeah. Great, Tracy. I really love that. I'm also a person of faith, so I understand absolutely where you're coming from. And I think it's that purpose in life. And that's what you've brought into your business in Thinkspiration, is you're distilling the purpose of the business into the people of the organization. And they understand their individual purpose in the vision and the mission and the strategy. And that's exactly what you're doing, So a wonderful work that you're doing. So Tracey, as we sort of get to the end of our conversation, tell us, what do you hope they will get out of this conversation? What do you hope you are leaving with people to think about in terms of living with purpose and learning from your lessons in your journey?
Thanks, Ray. I think that it's really just about an appreciation that the joy is not an accessory. It's not a nice to have. It's actually really, really foundational. It's like, if you focus on the joy, the performance will follow, almost. I guess that would be and I guess that comes right back from my tennis playing days. You focus on enjoying it, you win. And I think that in a world that is absolutely besotted with performance, I think there are a lot of unjoyful things that we do that actually are totally counteractive and counterproductive to joy in the workplace. So I think there are, there's a lot of joy killers, if I could call them that.
Yes.
And I think there's quite, again, if you have the mindset and you look for the right stuff, you will actually find it. And I think there's a lot to be seen. We talk about like leadership, and leaders are dealers in hope. Leaders need to bring like that energy, need to energize their people, need to motivate their people. Joy
Yeah.
is foundational to all of that, not the
Mhm.
superficial, like, oh, let's all have fun, whatever. But it's real, like, connection and purpose and meaning. For
Correct.
me, those are the sort of other concepts that hang on to joy, that are like attached to it. So I
Absolutely.
guess it's really look for it, be aware, like an awareness, and also an awareness of how it can serve the goal of being better, creating
Absolutely.
a better company performs better, So I think that for me
I
is what
love
I'd
that.
love people to take away.
Yeah. I
Mhm.
really love
Amazing.
that. Go out into the workplace and catch people living and leading with joy and celebrate that with them. Because as leaders, I don't think
Yeah.
we do enough of
Exactly.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I, just to add to that, I mean, a lot of and Ray, you'll know this, a lot of I guess my belief system is founded on strengths and the power of strengths and appreciating, other people's strengths, your own strengths. But the world that we live in and the world of work is not that. It's pretty opposite to that. It's like, what aren't you good at? Where are your development areas? What don't
Exactly.
you do? Let's have a conversation about that. Well, must we? I don't want to do that. But let's focus on what there is,
Correct.
what's going right, what's good, because that's the energizer and it also builds resilience. So life is tough, life is uncertain, times are hectic. We need to be resilient to be able to survive this and get through and be better. So I think it's actually essential that we focus on joy.
I love it. Because there's too much suffering in the world. I mean, at work and at home and
Yeah,
I think it's at work, it's a leader's responsibility to reduce the suffering as much as possible and create as much
yeah,
joy as possible. Like you said, the
yeah,
statistics are there, right? So
yeah.
people don't quit companies, they quit cultures and they quit their
Mm,
direct managers.
mm,
So, I mean, we're really in the middle of a leadership. I think it's a leadership epidemic, right?
Yeah,
So with all the people
I
that are
agree.
so unhappy with work, so everything that you're sharing here is wonderful, and it's consistent with what we're up to as well, co-creating more joy in the world. So people
mhm.
live, work, and
Right.
lead with it, intentionally, like on
Absolutely.
Yeah,
purpose. I love that. Not just as a result or like you said, a nice to have. Wonderful.
yeah.
Thank you, Greg. Thank you, Tracy. So Tracy, if our listeners want to reach out to you, what's the best way for them to contact you?
I think, on LinkedIn is good. So my profile's there. But
Mhm.
email wise, Tracy at 2tp.coza or Tracy at thinkspiration.coza, at Tracey. So that's people often forget the E, right? So yeah. But yeah, on LinkedIn's probably the easiest way. So yeah.
Awesome.
Well, to everyone listening, if something resonated today, we really invite you to take action on that insight because that's where the magic happens, right? We talk about a lot of ideas and hopefully there's something in there that you want to move forward on and not just think about. So simplify something, clarify something, illustrate something, turn a strategic sentence into a story, into a picture that someone can actually understand. Tracy, I love the way that you talked about, the picture, is a thousand words. And I think what a beautiful way to show that they're to help people feel seen, heard, and valued at a number of levels that you shared,
Yeah.
engaging in conversations using that illustration. So, absolutely, wonderful. So, really want to thank you, for the work you're doing in the world. It's been incredible connecting with you today and tapping into your wisdom, being in your energy. You are joy. You are pure joy. So there's
Oh,
no question
thank
about
you.
that. And then Ray, thanks
Thank
for
you, Greg.
co-hosting. Yeah, thanks for your leadership and supporting kind of the podcast and the movement. So great to be in your energy as well and your wisdom. And to everyone, I just want to kind of keep saying, keep living with more joy and keep sharing it because joy is contagious and the world needs more joy and the world needs more you. So we'll
Hmm.
see you next time on Joy Squared, a little bit joy. Thanks for joining us. Cheers.
Thank you. Cheers.
Thanks for spending this time with us on Joy Squared, where joy multiplies and everything gets better. Remember, joy isn't just something you feel, it's something you create and it's something you pass on. If this conversation sparks something in you, share it because joy is contagious. What we're building here is bigger than a podcast, it's a reminder and a movement that how we live, work, and lead truly matters. Until next time, live with joy, lead with purpose, and never forget to have fun. Keep choosing joy squared. And if you're enjoying the journey, we'd be grateful if you subscribe, like, and share Joy Squared so the ripple keeps spreading.